A few months ago, I was invited to an exclusive mastermind in Scottsdale, Arizona, with 11 other CEOs doing at least $20 million annually, and we had a combined revenue of $757 million for 2024. And I wanted to share some huge insights with you. My name is Masterminds I. I'm the CEO and founder of Voadera, an Amazon e-commerce marketplace company that did hundreds of millions of dollars on online marketplaces. And in this video, I wanted to share with you some details about this mastermind and why I'm a big believer of them, notes on what others presented and what I learned from them, exact notes on the section I presented, and how you can transform these insights to apply them to your brand for growth. Now, let's get into why I'm a big proponent of masterminds and some details on this mastermind specifically. So masterminds I'm a huge believer in them for, obviously, there's tangible and intangible reasons. Tangible reasons, there's the insights and takeaways, which I'm going to mention in the next section. But besides that, there's also relationships, collaborations, partnerships. So one of the people I met there were talking about partnering on a new brand. Another person is connected to a huge banker that we are actually looking to get a credit card from. So he might be able to introduce us to that person. I was also obviously able to introduce people to a lot of our resources, our contacts, whether that's freight carriers, connections at social media companies for ads, all that kind of stuff. So it was both ways. I was able to lean into a few huge things. Actually, one of the bankers that I'm talking to, where I'm paid to open a big line of credit card that most likely would have been possible without the connection that was made there. And then there's also the other side of it, where it's the intangibles, where it can it's a mix of things, but sometimes it's uncovering what you don't know, seeing what other people are working on. For example, I'm mentioning the takeaways, but other channels, how they're a big impact, uncovering stuff that sometimes you have blind spots that are most obvious to you. Just like driving a car, you can see your mirror, you see what's beside you, but then you actually have to look because there's a blind spot, even though it's the most closest thing to you, yet you're missing it and you're not seeing it because you're not getting other fresh perspectives on it. So that's the intangible aspects of it. But then there's also the mindset shifts and what's possible. So for example, I was talking to one person, he was able to ramp up a product, she was able to ramp up a product from $0 to $1 million a month in just 30 days. So that's a mindset shift for us. For us, like, we had to do a lot of work on that. And she did this on Amazon only, which was insane. And I obviously told her onto that. So I gave her credit for what she did. So there's also understanding what's possible and what goes on there. So that's why I'm a big proponent of masterminds. That's just some of it. I just wanted to go over high level. This mastermind specifically, like I mentioned earlier, it was for you have to be doing at least $20 million a brand a month. We're obviously surpassing that heavily, but then it had everyone above that. We even had someone that's $1 billion seller, unfortunately had to cancel last second due to tariff situation, which I'll get into later. But we had big players in the room, and I learned a lot from them. And there was even, especially on the soft aspect of things that we're going to impact, that's some of the details there. And I'll get into the 8 takeaways now. The first takeaway was about playing the long game. And this is a mindset that I noticed all the people there had. They weren't talking about hacks or gimmicks. Unlike maybe other ones that I go to and I talk to people that are just starting up, they're looking to make a quick buck. These guys are looking about building brand equity. They were thinking about long-term rather than kind of a short-term boost or getting, like, let's say 20 gray hat or black hat reviews. Almost none of those tactics were described there. It was all green approved stuff in alliance with TOS, and thinking about the long run. How can I invest something today that'll see the consequences or the fruits of it 1 year down the road, 3 years down the road? And that mindset, it was just reassuring for us because we have a lot of that. We pass up on a lot of opportunities that are either gray area or that will hurt the brand in the long run, just to make sure. Like, one basic example is product inserts, for example. They're not Amazon compliant. We avoid them entirely. Not entirely, there are some compliant versions of them, but we're proponents of not using them, and just seeing a lot of reassurance from that group there. The second takeaway was the significance of focusing and simplifying things. We noticed this very much when everyone gave presentations. One example was when they were talking about PDPs. We discussed hours, we for hours discussed the main image because it's such a huge lever. But then when discussing bullet points, you probably spent a couple minutes discussing that kind of stuff. And that was the theme across the entire 3 or 4 days, was basically really talking about the needle movers. We're not talking about stuff that wasn't as much of an impact. Another example was one guy talking about how he spent months focusing on supply chain and 3PLs. He went from paying $28 a pallet, I think, to around $13 a pallet. And he mentioned how that was going to save him $500,000 over the course of a year. Whereas on the other hand, if he spent that time, let's say, focusing on idle campaigns for his worst performing SKUs, it wouldn't have had that impact, $500,000 and bottom line profit. So that's where you have to understand what's really a huge lever in your business. And we were spending a lot of time focusing on that, whether that's on the PDPs or on our biggest weakness or product development. For example, when we were discussing product differentiation, we weren't discussing small features, talking about orders of magnitude. How can we really get a huge lift in some of this kind of stuff? We weren't talking about, for example, multitasking or doing 6 things at a time, rather focusing on one project, knocking it out, jumping on to the next one. Everyone discussed the project they were focused on. Another guy was focused on the ERP implementation, how that was going to systemize things and improve productivity. Another one was talking about moving his remote team from one country to another, and that's were just big monumental projects that have an order of magnitude impact on the business, rather than things that were going to marginally improve by 3% or 2%. And there's so many of this kind of stuff that are distractions that when you really think about it, even when done successfully, one example, obviously I mentioned the bullet points, another one is optimizing auto campaigns for a SKU that does $1,000 a month. These are really, even when you do them perfectly, they won't have a significant impact on your overall business, rather focusing on launching SKC campaigns for ranking on specific keywords that could have millions of dollars when you improve your organic ranking. That's what someone was talking about as his focus. The third one, and this is one that actually shocked me, was the importance and talking about non-Amazon marketing. I obviously knew there was some details to this, but I didn't realize how much of it was there. Some of the brands were spending approximately 40 to 60% of their budget outside of Amazon. This included things like whether it's social media ads. So mainly Meta was the one I heard there the most. There was also some Google in there. But then there was other stuff that was not as direct. So influencers, whether that's TikTok influencer, social media influencer, that has their target ICP, their customer avatar. And that's another thing. Everyone understood who buys their product. And I'll get into more of that later. But so the person that buys that product, who do they follow? And they do a collaboration and partnership with that person at mass. They're sending mass DMs, mass collaborations, all that kind of stuff. So whether it's buying media ads through, we mentioned Meta, Google, etc., or the other alternatives, partnering with collaborators, influencers, all that kind of stuff. I've seen a lot of that. A lot of budget was targeted towards that. And jumping into the next one is basically the non-Amazon channel focus. So they talked about some of this. They talked about the positives and negatives. One of the negatives they mentioned is that generally there was a consensus of disappointment in Walmart Seller Center and Target Plus, how they've underperformed for a lot of us despite our investments. And I've found something similar. We have seen a little bit of lift lately. We got a contact account manager that could help us. But on the other hand, they're very satisfied with TikTok Shop's performance. They say it lifted up really quickly. They were all obviously worried, like the current relationships between the US and China being a little bit volatile, how that could impact it. But they were very happy with TikTok Shop's performance. And also, the other channel we were very happy about was Amazon Canada. A lot of us were on there. It was doing really well for a lot of us. And we've been growing that almost double month over month just because we're expanding so many products there. And we talked about how to set that up more properly, how ads are cheaper there, and how it's a very underrated channel. We discussed how the UK is fine. It's not as bad as Walmart and Target, but it's still kind of in the development stages. The paperwork, the VAT is a little bit burdensome, but it's still kind of the juice is worth a squeeze. That's why we're also expanding there as well. For the fifth point, it was the obsession over product differentiation and optimizing the product. So I kid you not, I was talking to someone. They said they moved their house to live close to the factory just so they can check in and see how the products are made, specific chemicals, sending out focus groups, surveys for optimizing the product. It was insane type of focus because they have a good point. I mean, if the product is good, everything else will figure itself later. All these, like optimizing the PDP, can have the best product detail page, the best premium A+ content, the best PPC strategy. If your product sucks, that's going to only be an artificial or temporary boost. Eventually, people are going to find out you have a garbage product and the reviews are going to accumulate and they're not going to buy it. So all these strategies, they only work if your product is actually good. And that's the discussion we were having. They were talking about all these strategies like launches, giveaways, some of that stuff that are obviously approved and some of that indirect stuff. And I came in as like, you guys are mentioning this for hours. What if the product sucks? And I was kind of frustrated. They all looked at me as like, Jassim, of course, the product has to be good. Otherwise, all this other SHIT is irrelevant. So they were kind of saying that, and we kind of cracked a little bit of a laugh, but it's true. They were all aligned on the importance of optimizing the product when it exists, using AI tools. I think VOC AI is one of them. Obviously, Voice of the Customer is an internal Amazon tool. The customer reviews an internal Amazon tab. I could talk about optimizing customer reviews. You can I'll post a link below in the description about this. But it's important to analyze what your customers are saying, understanding your customer avatar, anticipating what they need. That's what, for example, Steve Jobs, he did really well. We didn't know he wanted an iPhone, but he came up with it and he amassed millions of dollars of market share. And the features that he come up with are stuff that customers didn't ask for, but because he understands us so well, he anticipates our needs and he comes up with them. And that's what you want to do with your customer. You want to understand them so well, be so close to your factory, and then so there's two aspects of this. Obviously, differentiating a product, and that's where you create something completely new and different, and you patent it. But then the other one is optimizing, which you're continuously iterating based on feedback, voice of the customer, understanding your avatar, doing focus groups, reviews, and obviously these surveying platforms. That's you want to make sure that you nail both of these right, and they talked about the importance of that. And for the sixth point, the reason that optimizing the product is so important is because Chinese competition is relentless. Someone gave a full presentation on what the Chinese are doing, how their strategies are, how they're able to get away, unfortunately, whether we like it or not, with a lot more black hat tactics and gray hat tactics than US sellers are able to. They're able to open up more accounts, all that kind of stuff, which Amazon, to be fair, has been trying to crack down as much as they can. But if you're only trying to compete on price, you won't compete with Chinese sellers. They're going straight to the source. You're not going to be able to compete with that. I actually did a video specifically on how to compete with Chinese sellers. You can watch in the description on how to improve your price, and it talks about a lot of the tactics there. But that's why we obsess over the product quality and product differentiation and premium packaging and all that kind of stuff, because you don't want to compete with the Chinese sellers on price. You won't win that war. You have to compete with them on quality and customer session. That's where you can see customers. Like one of the people I was looking at, legitimately, they had a competitor at $11 and their product was at $38. I was like, they look exactly the same. They had a little bit better reviews, 4.8. Their packaging was better. They had a few more features that they understood their customer better, but their creative was also better. So they had that premium positioning, and they were all able not only to charge 4 times the price almost, but actually they were also selling more. The other guy was selling, like, I think 22,000 a month. They were at like 10,000 units a month. So you can see that the impact of differentiation and product optimization and premium packaging to be able to compete with Chinese sellers. Otherwise, you're going to get crushed on price again. The seventh point that we discussed was the AI's impact on Amazon and how ChatGPT is coming in, how to utilize ChatGPT for Amazon improvements. We just, even a new one that just came up, that like images, and whether that's various tool, Google is now competing on. They released a new program, I think it's called Nano Banana or something like that, that's competing on images, and we're discussing it. We have a chat that we also discussing sometimes. But the impact that this has and the significance that AI has, not only on the helping you work, but also the customer understanding. So I mentioned before in one of my videos, noun phrase optimization versus keyword stuffing. And a lot of them were in agreement that we have to understand the customer's intent, because they're going to ask soon enough. Amazon is saying that 15 to 25% of sales are coming from Rufus. So you can imagine that soon customers is going to ask Rufus, what's the best lunchbox for kids that are in third grade? And then basically third grade, they need pencils. If you have that in your content, that's going to mark it for them, and you're going to go there. And that's why you have to describe intent rather than just keyword stuffing and trying to rank on the algorithm. The algorithm changed, so you have to change with it. So the impact of Rufus and other AI impacts on Amazon, how to get sales from ChatGPT, how does ChatGPT search your product when someone asks for something. And then the final point, the eighth, was obviously the geopolitics impact. We're discussing things on a big scale. We're discussing the tariffs impact. Things have settled down on now a little bit. I also did a video on tariffs. You can watch that in descriptions, how we survived it. But basically, they were talking about diversifying their factories, their supply chain, trying to bring it in US based when possible. Obviously, that's much tougher said than done, easier said than done. But the impact that has, and it was very much more of a, let's say, much more of a volatile situation back then as it is now, but it's still something that's ongoing and something that we definitely are keeping an eye on. If you found this video helpful and you actually want to learn how we saved over $800,000 in supply chain, go check out that video. Otherwise, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn on notifications so I can continue releasing these videos. They take me a lot of work, and I'm going to continue releasing our insights for free. If you're a brand doing over $1 million per year, come check us out at Voadera.com, schedule a call with an expert, and perhaps you can work something out.